Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Leadership in Action. This is a session that we do every Thursday. It's for 15 minutes, and it's about topics that matter to leaders. My name is Paul O'Byrne from Orca HR Solutions. Our mission is around transforming the consciousness and capabilities of leaders. Today, we're going to talk about the motivation myth. And what is that? And so we're going to talk about why you can't motivate people. And so if you just reflect on that for a moment, what do we really mean by that? Why you can't motivate people? Well, here's the hard truth is that you can't motivate people with pep talks, bonuses, rewards, employee of the month, table tennis, free food. People choose whether they're going to be motivated. Motivated isn't something that's done to it. It's something that people engage in, whether motivated. So why it matters is because most leaders think motivation is about what they do to people, but in fact, it's really around the environment they create. And so the question I'd ask you to reflect on yourself is, what type of environment are you creating for the people that are working for you? Or what type of environment are you working in? And what are those things that will cause you to be motivated? So we'll talk a little bit about why sort of traditional incentives fail. And then we're going to talk about two frameworks. One is called the PERMAH Framework. And this is a framework to sort of unlock sustainable and intrinsic motivation, because motivation is something that comes from internal. And so this is something that you can actually start using tomorrow. We'll also talk another framework called AMP, which is even sort of a simpler framework. And how can you use that in terms of engaging your people? So, why do carrots and sticks fail for long-term engagement? Well, incentives will work for short bursts, but not for long-term. The challenge about incentives is when you take away the incentive, do you still get the same behavior? So the incentive is not causing people to be internally motivated. It's causing people to be motivated by something external. And then when that incentive is taken away, then the people may feel completely demotivated because that was the thing that was keeping them, was that external force. And so that can sometimes even backfire. So for example, when you reward people for doing something, they're not intrinsically engaged in what it is. So they're maybe not even connected to the purpose. So if we can't force motivation, and I think, as a manager and leader, I kind of learned that very early on in terms of, I remember where we were having some challenges with a team that were working where a lot of people were feeling kind of a little bit disengaged. We were going through some restructuring around our team, and people's roles were changing and stuff like that. And people were sort of feeling like, oh my God, I'm not really engaged anymore because I'm going through this transition that feels like it's something cast upon me. And one of the things that we did was we decided to look at, okay, well, what is actually going on here, and how do we address? We were going to have to go through some major changes, but we got people engaged in that change. We helped them understand where it was going, what was the future that we were trying to create, and then also that they were going to be involved in creating that future. So once people felt that wasn't something that we're kind of forcing upon them, and we were engaging in them, they were finding meaning in terms of, where this was going, and they actually had a say, and we gave them some autonomy in terms of actually how they could define some of these new work. It had a huge impact in terms of turning a situation around where people feeling disillusioned, disengaged, to actually now feeling much more engaged. It's really important. And I just realized my microphone was not working. So I'm going to just a couple of things. I'm going to recap a couple of things. One, it's really hard to motivate people. People have to be motivated themselves. we're going to talk about what's called the PERMAH Framework, which was designed by Martin Seligman, who is one of the world experts on what is called sort of positive engagement or positive emotion. Incentives and carrots and sticks fail because they don't sustain the behavior. Once you take away the incentives, the carrots, the sticks, the rewards, the pizza, the table tennis tables, or even sort of those type of rewards, once you take them away, sometimes the behavior will not continue because people are being motivated by the external reward rather than intrinsic. So the key thing for a leader is, if you can't force motivation, we can create the conditions for motivation. So we're going to talk about the PERMAH Framework. So what is the PERMAH Framework? As I said, it was created by Martin Seligman. And so one of the first things that we need to talk about is P. So it's a P, it's got PERMAH. And so the first is positive emotion. So do you bring positive emotion and do you create positive emotion? In our previous Leadership in Actions, we talked a lot about emotional intelligence and social intelligence. And it's around, do you really connect to people's brain in terms of engaging them and creating sort of positive chemicals where they feel motivated? And there are certain behaviors that you can engage in that cause fight, flight, or fright, and there are other engagements which then produce, other chemicals like oxytocin, which cause people to move towards you, cause people to be much more engaged. And so we don't have time to go into that today, but so the first one is positive emotion. That can be done in small ways, just even kind of celebrating wins, engaging people, sort of in terms of having people feeling that, oh my gosh, I'm actually feeling a positive emotion about being in this place, about doing this work. And so it doesn't work on its own. And so the second that Seligman talked about was engagement. And so engagement is really around creating an emotional state. So it's connected to number one, where people invest their best self. And it's around their heart, their mind, their hands. And so, it's work that plays to their strengths and causes them to give discretionary effort. So it's fully engaging the whole body, the whole mind, and the whole heart. Then the third he talks about is relationships. And so are you creating the environment where there's psychological safety and people feel trust? And so that's something that, you don't do immediately, you build up over time. The fourth is called meaning. And this is around, do you connect daily work to a bigger purpose? Now, I was listening to actually a podcast with Martin Seligman just earlier this week, and he's actually changed the word meaning to mattering. And so does it matter to me? So can I personally connect to it? So sometimes it's not about that sort of bigger purpose. It's around what matters to me. So how do I align myself? How do my values align with the values of the organization? How does that purpose engage me? So that fourth one, in the original PERMAH framework, it was meaning. Seligman is actually thinking about calling it mattering. The fourth is accomplishment. Are we recognizing progress, not just end results? So sometimes just even small reinforcements along the way in terms of people's accomplishments, just even a simple thank you around that can help people feeling like that they're accomplishing small wins. It doesn't have to be at the end of a project that you give recognition. So that feeling of accomplishment. And then the last one is sort of around health. Does the environment you're creating support physical and mental well-being to sustain performance? So that's the PERMAH framework. Now, Daniel Pink simplified this into a acronym called AMP, and he talks about 3 practical levers. And so you could sort of think about if PERMA, you can't remember all of those aspects, just think about AMP. One is autonomy. Do people feel they have control over how they achieve outcomes? When I related that story earlier about, when I was going through sort of a major reorganization and role changes in my organization, when I got people engaged and they felt they had autonomy over what some of the outcomes were, everything shifted. So we went from a sort of a very disillusioned people feeling not engaged, to now, once they had autonomy and they were engaged in that. Mastery is around, am I feeling like, you're investing in me, in my skill developments, in my growth opportunities? Are you looking for growth opportunities? One of the things that I think is really important, sometimes people only look for growth opportunities without thinking about sort of playing to people's strengths. So there's many times where you can actually talk to some of your team members, identify their strengths, and get them involved in projects that may even be outside their particular role, but it plays to their strengths. So that's a great opportunity to invest in skill development. A simple thing like that might be somebody who is in a particular job, but they have an actual other skill that you have now identified through that conversation about strengths, and then you give them a project that relates to those particular strengths. The last one that Daniel Pink talks about is purpose. And this is the same around meaning and mattering and links to something that matters. There's another acronym which I really liked, and it was a book that was written by 2 people called Tracy Mallis and Paul Warner, and they talk about magic. And many of these frameworks are similar, and they talk about meaning, autonomy, growth, impact, and connection. So you've got PERMA, you've got AMP, and you have magic. So one of the questions I would ask you yourselves is like, when have you felt most engaged in work and why? And how can just that reflection, even something that you could take to your team? Is there something, or even talk about it, just even have a conversation? And if you think about your team, if we go back to the PERMAH framework, which aspect of PERMAH is weakest in your team now? Is it positive engagement? Is it positive emotion? Is it engagement? If you were to actually assess how engaged people are they giving that discretionary effort? Are they feeling an emotional state where they're investing their best selves? And if not, what is getting in their way? Then relationships. How is trust and psychological safety feel in your team? Meaning or mattering. Does the work matter to people? Does what they're doing, can you connect to that? And then health, accomplishment is, are we recognizing accomplishment? And then health. So which one of those are you weakest in, and which are you strongest? So if you're strongest, you can play to those strengths. If you're weakest, it's something that you can look. So one of the things, here's a very practical thing that you could do going forward, is you could actually take the PERMAH framework and you could rate each one just on a scale of maybe 1 to 10 and say, okay, am I a 1 on this? Am I a 5 on this? And then look at what could be one quick win that you could do each week around the PERMAH framework. And then, so what I would ask you to do is commit to one change. So if you take that PERMAH framework, you put it in and you score it from 1 to 10, and then you identify one thing that you can do, and then invite your team to share that comments. And so then just doing those small things, you will start creating the conditions where people feel that the environment is motivating them, because motivating is not a push. So just a final recap, you can't give people motivation, but you can create the environment where it lives. Thanks, and we'll see you next week.